In this tutorial, you'll learn how to make a link item active when scrolling past a section.
Alright, so I've set up a simple project here. It's currently an empty HTML file, and this is what we want to create. Right, so we're going to quickly code up this navbar and these sections here. It's not going to be responsive. I have a separate video on creating a beautiful responsive navbar, but that's not really the point of this video. So we're just quickly going to code up this page here just so you can get a sense of how the HTML is structured. So I just have an empty HTML file and I have this logo here, and yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an HTML boilerplate, right? HTML, pick the second option, and we'll say tutorial. We're going to link to a style sheet, right? Style.css. And we're also going to write some JavaScript. And these days you can link to that in the head section. So we can say script source, it will be script.js. Now, when you link to it in the head section, it's a best practice to also use the defer attribute so it doesn't block parsing the rest of the page. In the past, people would add it to the end of the body, but these days we can put it in head, but make sure you include the defer attribute. Okay, so then let's see, we're gonna need a style.css file and a script.js file. Now, this project uses a different font as well, so very quickly we can go to fonts.google.com and you can find all sorts of beautiful fonts here. Now, my go-to font is Inter. This is a very popular font, looks very professional, and it's really my go-to font. I use it almost in any project. In the past, I used Poppins a lot, but as you get a bit of a mature design sense, people typically tend to migrate to Inter. It's very similar to Roboto. So you can just copy that, right? You can just copy this and you can paste that here in your HTML. I'm going to hold Shift-Alt-F to format everything. So the first two links are just optimizations, and then the third one is what you actually need. So this is all we need in our HTML, in the head at least. So then here, let's see, we have this navbar. And again, I have a separate video on how to create a responsive navbar, including hamburger menu, including double navigation in case you want that. It's a separate video. But here the HTML is going to look like this. That's actually a header tag. I'm going to give it a class of header. And then in there, we're going to have sort of a wrapping or container element, a content, because we want the header to stretch all the way, but the content in there should be restrained a little bit. Right? Also because, well, in terms of responsiveness, we can add some padding as well. So it's not going to sit against the edge, right? So it's better to structure the HTML like this. So in there, we're going to have a logo. Typically, you want to be able to click on that, right? So we're going to use an anchor tag here. And then we have the actual logo, which is an image, right? And I'm going to use BEM notation here for the classes, in case you were wondering what those weird underscores are. I have a whole course on CSS, and it deals with this topic as well, of how to properly name your classes, how to structure everything in your HTML and classes, and then of course in your CSS as well. You can find the link for that course in the description. I highly recommend you check it out if you want to work with the front end, right? It's really important that you have mastered Flexbox, for example, also CSS grid, animations, and transitions. All right, so then we're going to have the actual nav, right? That's going to hold these actual links, right? So the nav tag is appropriate for important sets of navigation. And typically it's a bit nested here. So you're going to have a bunch of nesting here. So we're going to have a list, and in the list we have a nav, we have items. And then we have the actual anchor tag in those items, right? So here it could be home, right? Now I'm going to put my caret or however you call it here. I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to go 2 times up arrow key, and then I can hold shift alt down arrow key to duplicate those lines. So this should be solutions, this should be projects, and this should be contact. Right, that's all for the header. Now we're going to have these sections. And typically you're going to use the main element for that, right? The main element is for the dominant content on the page. And so you only have one of that on each HTML page. Now in there, we're going to have sections. So we have the section tag. And in there, you typically have a heading. So I'll just use some heading element here, home. And then we're going to duplicate this again. So I'm going to put my caret on this line. I'm going to hold shift up arrow key. And let's see, then shift alt down arrow key to duplicate this. Right, home, solutions, projects, and contact. Okay, so let's see. If I refresh now, it's going to be one big mess, and that's okay, because now we're going to go to our CSS. Now, I don't want to keep refreshing. Whenever we make a change, I don't want to keep refreshing. So I've installed an extension here called Live Server. It's very popular, and it will automatically refresh the page whenever I make a change in my HTML or CSS or JavaScript. So I can right click on HTML, open with live server. It gives me a different URL, and I'm gonna paste that right here. Okay. Okay, so let's go to our CSS, quickly style this. So I like to start off with a simple CSS reset. Because the browser adds some default styling, it adds margin and padding, and a lot of that stuff is what we don't want. So we want to start from a clean slate. So I'm going to say margin 0, padding 0, and typically people also set the box sizing property to border box. This is the most difficult property in CSS. Most developers do not understand this, so don't worry. I have a separate video on this if you want to learn more about that. We also want to reset the anchor tag styling. So I'm going to say text D. It will already suggest it for me. Text decoration, none. And the color should simply be inherited instead of being that blue color. And let's see, it's a list. The list comes with bullet points. We don't see it because it's sitting against the edge right now. But we do want to set the list style to none. Right, so this is a simple CSS reset. So to make it a bit cleaner here, I'm going to add a heading here, reset. And then we're going to have some base styles for the page. This is typically how I structure my style sheets. So what we can say here, the body, we're going to add the font, right? We've imported the font, but we also need to set the font family here. So it should be Inter. Now, in case it's not available, maybe the server is down, right? Maybe the server is down. We can provide a backup after the comma here. So typically people set sans serif here. This means pick any sans serif font on the user's computer. And let's also set the background color. And it's going to be E8F0F7. A bit of a bluish color. It's a bit of a design trend. Instead of using pure grays, people add a bit of blue in their grays to make it look a bit cooler. I think it looks better. All right, so then we get to the normal styles. So here we have normal styles, right, or other styles. And we're gonna say the header should get a background color of that, of the darker color, 19, 22, 26. I actually don't even know why I'm using RGB here. It doesn't really matter. Let's see. Yeah, so then we get into the header content. And let's see what else we have here. We have logo image. I like to just select all of that so that we get it over with. So we have logo image. And then we have the nav with all of those nested elements. So we have nav list, nav item, and nav link. Okay, and then we also have the main, right? Main section. And heading. And I believe those are all the selectors that we're gonna need. So let's see, let's style the links so we can actually see them with the dark background. So let's go to nav link. So they should get a white color, but with a little bit of opacity, lower opacity, so that it's not pure white, because I think it blends in a little bit better like this. The font size should be 15 pixels. And they should get a hover effect. Let's quickly add that here as well. So in the hover state, the opacity should become 1. Right, so this should simply become 1 when it's hovered. Now that's very instant, it's not very smooth. So we can make this a transition, right? We can just say transition all 0.2 seconds, something like that. It's a bit smoother, right? So animations and transitions, another crucial concept in CSS to master. This is very simple, but there's more complicated things with keyframes and things like that. It's also covered in my CSS course. Okay, so then let's quickly do the layout here. Now, when you're dealing with layouts in Flexbox, the vast majority of the time you want to think about Flexbox. So here we have a logo and the nav, right? And they should sit, well, let's see. They should sit like this, right? Now they're sitting like this. So we have nav, logo, header, content is the parent element. So you want to identify the parent element. And what you can do then is say display flex. And this is the default layout that you get in Flexbox. To align them vertically, we can say align item center. And then horizontally, we have justify content. We can say space between. We could also say center. Right, they will sit in the center. Or end, they will sit at the end. We want space between. Right, and let me actually make this a little bit wider. Right, so that's a quick layout tutorial here. Now let's also do these links. They should of course sit like this, right? Not vertical like this. So these are nav items. Their parent element is the nav list. You can go to nav list and make this a flex container. So we're sort of nesting flex boxes or containers. That's perfectly fine. Doesn't cause any issues. And there should be space between them as well, column gap of 40 pixels. Of course, it should be, the height should be bigger of this nav, right? So we can go to our header. So we can go to header content. We can simply set a height of 60 pixels and they shouldn't sit against the edge here, right? So we can simply set a maximum width and then center it. So we can say the maximum width should be 1200 pixels. Right, so now this is 1200 pixels, but now it should also be centered, right? So it's 1200 pixels wide, but it should also be centered in the header. So a quick trick in CSS, if you have used a max width, is to use margin auto. It has nothing to do with flexbox. So we say margin auto, margin 0 on top and bottom, and an auto on left and right side, and that will center it. So we can also quickly add some padding on the left and right side to make it a bit responsive. Right, so 0 on top and bottom, 30 pixels on right and left side. All right, so then we are pretty much finished with the header here. Let's see, the logo probably needs some work. So the logo is a bit big here. It's an image, and you can just set a height on an image. It will adjust its size. It's a bit smaller now. Now it's an inline level element images, and they come with some weird space below it, and that's what's causing some misalignment here. So instead of an inline level element, I'm going to make it a block level element. So it's going down a little bit because now that weird white space below it is gone. All right, now let's add these sections because we have home, solutions. We have 4 sections here. They have some different colors. So let's go to each section here. Right, they all need some kind of height. Let's say 100% of the viewport. And we want to center the text in there. And actually, let me show you how that would work. Let's see. Let's actually just give them some background color so we can see the centering. So we have the first section should get a slightly different background color. So we are going to select them individually just for the background colors. So we have 4 in total. So 2, 3, and 4. Right? They already have their height. Background. You can say background color or just background actually. So this should be RGB 182, 190, 198. All right, that's the home. Again, some blue in it, right? Popular design trick. Maybe you want to use that. Then we have 190, 198, 182. This is a yellow color and it's actually not correct. So this should be 182 and 198. And then the third one, let's see. Yeah, it's a more purple color. Yeah. All right. So then the third one here should get 197, 198, and 182. And the last one should get 198, 182, and 182. Okay, so these are the colors that we have. Now they take up the complete width, right? But their width should also be restrained. So they're sitting in the main section. So we can simply make this a maximum width of 1200 pixels. Right, so then we get this, right? So it's just 1200 pixels. Now it should be centered, so we can use the same trick. We can say margin auto on left and right side. And we also want to add some padding on the left and right side. So 30 pixels on left and right side. Okay, so now we want to center the text or the heading in the sections. Now, the easiest way of centering something is actually with Flexbox. It's a layout problem, right? So you want to try using Flexbox. So we can say display flex, and then horizontally we can say justify content center. That will center it horizontally. And then here vertically we can say align items center. Right, so now the text in there is centered. We also want to make the text a little bit bigger. So we'll just say font size 150 pixels. All right. Now we want the header to scroll with us as we scroll down. So we're going to make this a fixed header. So let's see. It's a bit tricky sometimes with making the header fixed. So we have position fixed. If we do that, it will scroll with us, but it doesn't have the complete width. For some reason this happens. So we do have to set the width to 100%. And so then we have this. Now, one thing that you may have noticed is that when you use position fixed, the content below it sort of shifts upward because it's taken out of the normal flow. So other elements are going to act as if it doesn't exist. So then the space has become available. So all the content here, moves up, right? So you need to be aware of that. So that's fine here, but I have a solution for that in a different video if you want to know how to solve that, if you don't want that, right? We're just going to go with what we have now, right? So we're not going to make it responsive or anything. What we want now is that when we scroll past this home section into the solution section, we have some kind of visual indicator that we are at that section. And the way that we're going to do that with a visual indicator is just with an active class. So what we can do is we can simply add an active class here, for example, and then in the CSS, we can go to, well, somewhere here, and we can just give it the same styling as when we hover the nav link, for example. Right, so here, when I save it now, you can see the home link here has this active class, and it is indeed, it has a visual indicator now, right? Now, what we want is that when we scroll down at some point here, the active class needs to be removed from the home link and it needs to be added to the solutions. And we're going to need some JavaScript to do that. And we're going to need a couple of things specifically. So let me show you what we're going to need. So when we scroll, so we're going to listen for the scroll event. We're gonna look at how far we have scrolled down. We can do that with window scroll Y, right? So right now I haven't scrolled. So when I type window.scroll Y, it's 0. When I scroll down a little bit more and I type it again, I can see, oh, I've scrolled 300 pixels, a little bit more, and it's 500 pixels, right? So window.scroll Y gives us how much we have scrolled so far. That's one thing we need. Another thing that we need, if we look at the elements here, is we need to know how far away each of these sections are from the top. This section here is actually sitting right against the top of, as you can see, of the document, right? And I can actually prove that to you. So I have selected it here in the elements, and then you can say $0. That's a trick in the console here in the browser, but that will give you that element that you just selected in the elements. And then we can say offset top. You can see this home is indeed sitting 0 pixels from the top of the document, right? So it's actually sitting below the header here. The header is fixed, right? So it's not taking up any space. So it's sitting below the header all the way to the top. Now this other section here, I've selected that here now. So now if we do this again, that solution section is sitting 694 pixels from the top of the document. And it doesn't change if we scroll, by the way. Right, so it will always sit 694 pixels, even if I'm scrolled down here. So then we can also check the projects section, right? So that's this one. This one is sitting 1388 pixels from the top, right? And the other one sits at 2082. So the way to know when we are in the solutions section, for example, is when this number window.scroll Y is at least the 694 pixels, right? Because then we have scrolled more than the number of pixels that this is sitting from the top of the document, right? So that's basically the trick here. Now, to make all of this work, we do need to add a couple of things here in the HTML. So we need to give each section here an ID. So we're going to give this an ID of home. We're going to give this an ID of solutions. We're going to give this an ID of projects, right? This makes the most sense. You can call it whatever you want, of course, but this makes the most sense. And then also here we need to link to that in the href. So the home is going to link to the home section, right? Make sure you include a hashtag here. This one solutions, this one projects, and this one contact. So then we can go to our JavaScript here. And in the JavaScript, we're going to need two things here. We need to select two things. So we're going to say the nav link elements, because we need to be able to add and remove the active class. So we're going to select all of them. So we're going to use query selector all, and it's nav link. And then I'm going to hold Shift Alt down arrow key to duplicate this line, because we're also going to select all section elements. So it's going to be dot section here. So what we're going to do is we need to keep track of what section we are currently in when we scroll down, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to listen for the scroll event. So on the window object, we can add an event listener. We're going to listen for the scroll event. So whenever the user scrolls, we're going to fire this function. And we need to keep track of what section we are currently in. So we can say active section or current section, perhaps. That current section, initially it's home, right? So we can say initially it's home, right? Now what we're gonna do is when we scroll, it's gonna check how far we have scrolled down, and it's gonna compare that with every section's offset top, right? So it's gonna look like this. Maybe I should just write it and then explain it, because you can follow the logic a little bit better. So when we scroll, we're gonna go over each section. So section elements, I like to append L or else to the variable name if we are working with HTML elements. For each of them, so then we have section L. For each section, right? After we scrolled, we're gonna check if the window.scrollY is more or equal to that section element's offset top. Right, then we know that we are in that section. So then we can set the current section to that section. Well, this section that we just added has an ID, right? So we're just gonna take its ID to keep track of that. Right, so initially it's home. Now when we scroll, it's gonna check. Initially it's gonna see, well, we have only scrolled a little bit, so maybe 100 pixels. That is not more than solutions is sitting from the top of the document. It's like something like 500 pixels. So this is gonna be false, but eventually we have scrolled, let's say 800 pixels, which is more than this solution section is sitting from the top of the document. In that case, it's gonna be section L.id, it's gonna be solutions, it's gonna be the current section, okay? But that's not enough. So then we only have set the current section properly, right? So actually we can, well, let's actually do it after we've added this. So then we know the current section. And then of course we need to add and remove the active class and set it on the appropriate link, right? So then we need to go over each nav link. So nav links, we're gonna go over each one. And we're gonna say nav link L. So then we need to check, because it's going to be solutions, for example. And so we're going to go over each nav link here. We're going to check if its href has that has solutions in there. Right. So if that nav link element .href includes the current section, right? So navlink L.href could be, for example, hashtag solutions, right? And if we have set this to solutions, this is going to be true. In that case, we're going to add that active class to that nav link, right? So we're going to say navlink L.classlist.add the active class. Right, it's a little bit complicated here, but if you pause the video and go through the logic here, you should be able to grasp it. Right, and I'm using modern arrow function syntax, right? So it's really important that you have mastered modern JavaScript. You're never really going to be comfortable with web development with JavaScript unless you have, sat down and really took some time to master it. So I have a whole course on JavaScript. I highly recommend you check it out if you want to take it to a professional level. Same goes for the CSS, Flexbox, CSS Grid, animations and transitions, very critical to understand as a front-end web developer. I have a course on CSS and the links are in the description, definitely check it out. So here, if I save now, let's check it out. So I'm just gonna remove this from the URL, just from a clean slate. So now I'm gonna scroll down and we're gonna see if this works, right? So you can see now that solutions has the active class, right? We can see that, but we can also inspect that. We can see active class here for solutions. If I scroll down a little bit more, eventually the projects also gets the active class, right? And it's not working here for contact because I cannot scroll down any further. So let me actually increase the height of the body a little bit. I'm just gonna set this to a very large height, right? So then if I scroll past contact, it also becomes active. Now, of course, when we make it active, when we add the active class, it should also remove it from the previous one. So just before we add the active class, we can also select the element that currently has the active class, right? So we can just select the element with an active class and then just say class list remove its active class, right? And then we will add the active class, right? So this is just to remove it from the previous one. Right, so if we do this, initially it's the home link, right? And actually we don't even need to we don't need to edit the active class here, but let's just keep it that way. So now let's see what happens. I'm going to scroll down and you can see it gets added to the solutions links and it gets removed from the home link, right? So now it's working properly. When we scroll down here, for example, ideally it goes to the solutions link a little bit earlier, right? Because now we are already, firmly in the solutions section. So actually it should already be the solutions link now that is actually active, right? So right now we're actually sort of waiting until the last moment and before adding it, but actually it should already be added, somewhere around here, let's say. Right, so we can just change this condition here a little bit. So here, when the window.scroll is at least, that's what we're saying here, bigger or equal to this offset top. Right, so we can also just reduce that number a little bit to make it happen a bit earlier, let's say. Right, so we could say, for example, this offset top minus 200 pixels, right? So currently it's like right at the top, right? But maybe it should happen 200 pixels earlier or something like that, right? So you can you can hard code a number like that. Depends a bit on how big your sections are. If you have very small sections, maybe 200 pixels is too much. But now I've saved it. Let's try it again. So now I'm going to scroll here. You can see now it gets added a little bit earlier, right? It looks a bit better, I think. Right now also projects, right? Switches a bit earlier. I think that's a bit more appropriate. Now, just to make it a little bit more advanced, we're hard coding 200 pixels here, but maybe your sections aren't as tall, or maybe they are very tall, and maybe you want it to be, you know, relative to their own size instead of hard coding like 200 pixels, right? So what you can also do is, instead of doing this, you can say, you can get its own height. So you can say client height, and then you can divide it by, for example, 4, right? Or maybe let's try 2. So you're gonna take its own height, divide it by 2, and that's the distance at what point it already should you know, change. So here, let's try it out. So now you can see it already starts off a bit earlier, quite much earlier now, because it takes the half of its own size, and that's going to be the point at which it's going to switch essentially, right? So now it's going to be much earlier, right? You can divide it by 3. And now you have a more relative way of doing that. All right, now what we may also want is, when you click here, we go to these sections, and that's working actually out of the box, because we did this with the hashtag and then the section name, and they have the ID. So this will already work, but it's not very smooth. So what you may try to do is, you want to make it smooth. So you could go to, for example, HTML. You could select the HTML, and there is a property called scroll behavior. You can set it to smooth. So when you do that and then click, it's going to work like this. Now, the only downside is that, in combination with our solution here, is it's going to be a bit slow changing the active link, right? So ideally, of course, as soon as you click on it, it stays sort of active. That's the only downside. So when you're using smooth scroll with our solution here, you know, maybe this is not exactly what we want, but it still looks good, I think. Another downside here is, for example, when you go from home to projects, it sort of goes in between. So it doesn't go immediately to projects, it sort of skips. It doesn't skip solutions, right? So if I go to contact and then home, it also goes through these other ones, right? So these are some small downsides in case you're using this in combination with smooth scroll behavior. So you may want to undo this, or you want to have maybe a more JavaScript solution, so that when you click on it, it actually only stays active on this one. But I'll have a separate video on that, on how to add and remove an active class on click. By the way, if this was helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Also, check out my courses on CSS and JavaScript if you want to take those skills to an advanced level, because in there we will build some beautiful real-world projects from scratch, so you can see how everything fits together and really master CSS or JavaScript. And I will also release other courses soon, like React and Node.js. So if you want to be notified, then make sure you are subscribed to the email newsletter. You can find the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.